time to be on the show and for breaking down how you got into this. And just you have a really interesting story, and I would just like to allow you to, take us from your interesting past and how you moved into cannabis and some of your directions that drove you into do what you do.
Okay. Well, it started at a younger age when I had, I was an athlete who played a lot of sports, so I was already abusing my body. And I was also diagnosed with epilepsy, so I had a lot of seizures. So I had found a passion with cannabis at an early age. Like I said, 16, 17 is when I really started seeing the effects of it with my epilepsy. From there on, I kind of just wanted to explore that medicine. And within exploring that medicine, I had moved up to the hills from Davis, probably in my, early, late 20s, or not late 20s, early 20s. I think I just turned 20,
Is that where you
21-ish.
Davis area?
Yeah, I grew up in Davis.
Yep.
And that's where I met my friend from Salmon Creek when he went to UC Davis. And then he told me, come on up. And so we went up there, and he was the Salmon Creek Big Bud, and taught me how to grow and all this and that. And I learned how to do some breeding, basic out in the sticks kind of breeding, because we had to hide still. We were only limited to, with our 215, we were only limited to, what was it, even 10 plants, if that, in Southern Humboldt. So we had to have our little breeding projects off to the side. And, I wasn't really taking it serious then. But then as things started to progress in the 215 market, I started to get curious because labs were offering analytics to medical patients and this and that. So I started taking all the strains that I've had around that I know that had helped me with medicine and some of the crosses, and started looking at them and saying, wow, okay, so this, and trying to put those associations together. So once I started seeing those analytics that I was comparing with the traditional thin layer chromatography of things, that's when I really started to go, no, I need to get some equipment, real, like an HPLC, a high performance liquid chromatography unit, to really dial in my stuff, instead of, now that I'm taking this breeding a little bit more serious and analyzing it and implementing it with I own a organic fertilizer company that makes blends, and so incorporate it with that. So that was really like my little mini timeline.
Did you because you're really well known for your micronized formulations through Sensational Solutions. Mm-hmm. That was something that you evolved into after you started doing the cannabis analytics. Like, how did you start to steer into that? Because you were one of the first people I really can think of that really got into micronized organics, that allowed you to be able to have quickly assimilable organic formulations, and the adoption was really good. I mean, that's how I met you, was through your foods work. Mm-hmm. And was that something that you went into after you got into the testing? Did the breeding and the testing kind of drive you into that direction? How do those three mm-hmm. things integrate?
Exactly, you nailed it on the head right there. My curiosity was first there, with the thin layer, then the labs, and then with the hemp industry, I was like, I'm wondering if it has something to do with the nutrients, the wrong time, what nutrients at what time, and what's doing what with the nutrients. So I invested into the HPLC to see that first. And then one day I was like, I should start testing my males, and that's when I just kept on, well over 7 years now, or 6-7 years now, that I've been testing my males with my breeding project. So I know what my males have, because, a lot of us can see the females, what they can test. And that was easy for me when I was giving doses, and so then I would be able to give a fertilizer dose to subject A, subject B, or subject C of the same seed stock, and say, wow, okay, this one needs more nitrogen at this time. Unlike this one, looks like it needs more calcium and phosphorus. you know, so then I could go with my nutrients and give it to them. At the same time, I can test them and say, oh, wow, the one that I gave too much nitrogen to that didn't need it is growing more biomass and less cannabinoids. And then if you have a subject next to it, giving it a different dose, you're like, wow, this one's producing more cannabinoids than biomass. So that's where I was able to utilize the HPLC to really see what's going on with the plant, indoor, outdoor, greenhouse, you know, whatever discipline I was able to grow.
Yeah, it's such an interesting approach, because just like, you know, you briefly touched on your I would say your mentor, but really your friend that took you into Salmon Creek. You was just so fortunate that you were able to meet him, because, you know, he was a legend in the community, and you know, a really positive activist in terms of pushing the envelope of acceptance of cannabis. And I'm sure that that had a huge impact on your selection in genetics that you chose to work with in the direction you went. What was it that you were working with originally? What was some of the first lines that you worked with when you got up to Salmon Creek? What was the evolution of your like genetic progression? Just as a
Oh, the
timeline.
first ones?
Yeah, so that people can kind of see, because you go back to that 2000 nexus when everything starts to move, and
Train
it's
wreck. Train wreck. That was
first.
definitely one of my first ones. You know, I did hydro, and then there was the friends who went to Amsterdam. Super skunk was one. And then you know, obviously the big bud, and then a lot of hazes back. And I had a passion for these hazes back then. So those are my earlier ones, but Trainwreck, that's a very known one. That was one that, you know, I was had through high school and all that stuff, and then, you know, early 90s, you know. So it was definitely one that I was around, and one of the first ones I was exposed to besides the big bud as far as quality. Or brickweed was the first I was exposed to. But as far as quality herb, the Trainwreck and big bud are the first two, and then White Widow also. So
Did you notice impact on your epilepsy from any of these varieties early? Did you
it was the big bud.
the big bud was the one that had the most impact? Because you're in this thing that we're involved in, which is this auction project. You were the provider of this skunk line, and I was just curious because Chris was, you know, the creator of the Salmon Creek big bud work. And I just was curious, was it just because I used to run that variety as well, and I thought it was incredible cannabis, and in its day it was an absolute legend. But for
Mm-hmm.
you found medical benefit from it for the epilepsy.
He selected more for the skunk, uh, Afghan aspects of it, not so much the Northern Lights. So he was going for more the sedative aspect, and more call it spiritualness of the euphoric of the high. So that's more what his thing was. Because I remember back in the day we were trying to do some back cross projects from leftover seeds he had from Amsterdam. He was like, oh, hopefully I can isolate the more skunk genetics that are in this plant or whatnot. And then we had Deep Chunk. Deep Chunk's a great classic one, and we were working on introducing a new Afghan to that plant to make, you know, the Salmon Creek Deep Chunk cross, which I ended up making down the road with my S1 Salmon Creek Deep Chunk. Great smoke. And so those were some of the projects of why I chose to breed with certain things, like you just said, skunk, to try to reproduce those characteristics that he selected for.
What got you into the micronization? I mean, there was really very little micronized product at that time. I mean, you were one of the first people I really can say had that product available for cannabis growers. You didn't see it in the stores. You didn't see it really available. What was the driving force behind that? How did you go that route?
So I used to work for a hydroponic nutrient company before. I was research and development for Humboldt Nutrients. You would probably see me on all those videos on YouTube. I used to have really long dreadlocks. That's how we met, Kev. You know, and so people knew me from that day. And so one of the owners who's the supplier of like a lot of the you know uh, ingredients to Humboldt Nutrients showed me this material one day, and it was like micronized worm castings, micronized like compost, you know, not just fines. It was micronized, like it floated and it was concentrated. And my wife, who was the lab director microbiologist at Humboldt State at the time, I said, "Hey, check this out. You know, let's see what this is all about." They threw her and the grad students threw that into the under the scope, and we're like, "Wow, this is so much more just as bioactive without brewing it as a compost tea that's done for 3 days." So I was like, "Oh, okay." Then I went to work and started taking things like General Hydro and BioBiz and using that as my like base subjects, saying, okay, well, how do I achieve these results with these? And started adding this, adding that, adding this, adding that. Went through so many, revisions, but I used an inert soil to try to base that up there. And then I was like, if this works, it works. And then we got it. And then I was like, let's market it. And then I was approached by a few stores and a few things. And then that's where it all started right there. So it was more that I took the time to see what the plant wanted at any given time versus what the soil needed, because every plant doesn't necessarily respond to a recommendation that the soil is given, because of environment. Like I just said earlier, every seed has a different need. So you could be building your soil and it could be for a plant that you grew the year before. So not every plant's going to take in the same exact nutrient that's in your soil. So by taking the time with every single ingredient and watching the cannabis plant specifically on what it needed at specific times was how I was able to dial that in. So further down the line, that's when I was trying to see is like, well, what I designed to make the plants work the way it does. And from the analytics I saw before owning my own HPLC, I was like, well, let me start seeing what each dose is going to do and what I can maximize the plant with, to the point of what is it going to burn? Is this going to cause this cannabinoid? Is this going to cause terpenes to go away? Which the Light Lab 3 from Orange Photonics gives you a percentage of terpenes, but doesn't break down each terpene. Mm-hmm. So you get to see like what's going on through every stage giving the fertilizers. And then on top of that, all the ingredients in there contain like either food grade for animals, humans, or whatnot. It's not your traditional ag fertilizer amendments that are just ground up. So it's like the more quality things, like you could eat it. It's safe around children. I designed it to be safe around my pets in case they get into it. And so you're getting these really fine amino acids and enzymes that when you're producing seed, they love that for storing. That's a good storage mechanism for them to absorb those things so they can last longer, have a better, in my opinion, better sprouting rate. That's just my observation so far. Mm-hmm. Is that they seem to be able to last longer when they have those things. Part of the reason why giving them those aminos and enzymes is that the plant can make those enzymes, but it's got to work twice as hard to make them. So if you can avoid making them work that and let them focus on making something else by giving them those good enzymes, and a lot of my enzymes are iron, aminos are like iron aminos, magnesium aminos, not just sulfates and salts, which can bind up your soils, and so I'm looking at it as like, well, how do I maximize the plant and what each seed capable of doing? So that's in a nutshell. I mean, I can keep going on and on. We got time here.
We got time. To me, it's important information because there's so many people that want to be involved in their own production of cannabis and they want to work in breeding. But like I said, your approach to it was so unique to me in the sense that you were driven from desire to consume cannabis, but you had some medical issues that you wanted to alleviate with cannabis. And so the motivation was very direct. And then by being exposed to good genes and then being exposed to organic cultivation in the hills, it drove you into this methodology. And then with technology, you were able to be one of the really first adopters. I think you're one of the first people I met that had their own, testing equipment to utilize that wasn't necessarily a lab. And so for
Mhm.
me, I've always seen you as kind of an anomaly in that you had this medical focus, then you went into analytics to understand better, then you combined it with the desire to create a food delivery system that let you achieve the objective. Then you turn that into a company, and then you use the combined technology and skills and direction to work in breeding and selection. And so
Mhm.
it's just a really organic approach, because to me, like, you exemplify, even though you're from Davis, like, I mean, I'm not from Humboldt either, but you exemplify the Emerald Triangle ingenuity of someone with a desire who chased every desire down the rabbit hole as far as they could go. And then when they came back out, they brought the information and presented it to the public, because you've always been very open about your research. You've always been very open about what you make and what you do and what impacts you see. And so it's just been a very collaborative attitude with you and the community. And so when you're working in these directions, did you see things that were very difficult to solve? Was there problems that you faced in your formulations and your direction that was a struggle, an unexpected struggle?
Well, because I took my time and watched what the plant was going to do, yeah, I came across a lot of roadblocks. There's always going to be roadblocks. Nothing's ever going to be simple. And that's the thing that you said earlier when you're saying about all these new people coming into it. It's patience. Growing is all about patience. Developing new strains is about patience, and observation. You got to observe the plant and what the plant needs. And so that's kind of where my faults happened, was because sometimes I was like, oh, this is great, I got this, and I was, when I started out as a hydro grower, I was blinded by a lot of what was missing. Unless you messed up the ppms or the pH, you didn't really know half the time what was going on, because the synthetics were covering a lot of those things up. And so um by doing organics and then starting out with breeding stock that wasn't worked as much, you start seeing all the different variables, and you're like, man, okay, do I give up this strain? I really like this one. So, well, if you really like it, who's telling you not to do it? Is IG, is Twitter, is Facebook telling you this isn't a good strain? The people telling you that? Well, do you like it? Is it something you feel like you want to work on? That's what I always try to encourage people with. It's just, um, do you. Don't do what other people are doing unless it's something that someone needs or wants from you, but do you. And that's where a lot of like fine wines, good, new microbrews come from, is because they did what their palate and their friends and who's surrounding them liked. So I always tell people to just have patience and to get to the legal look, the recreational look or whatnot, takes time, you know? So, um, yeah, that's how I put it. Is I'm always constantly seeing failures with different medias, different seeds. I've underfed a lot of plants before because I misjudged new strains, like that. So I fail a lot. Nothing's perfect in my world. So
Yeah, never perfect anywhere. But no, it's just such an interesting journey, just because I said you touch so many facets in terms of collection, breeding, nutrient development, chromatography testing. So it's an interesting conversation, because so few people I know have done that in that organic method of just constant discovery and refinement, and it resulted in some really good education. How did you? So in terms of what we're working on now, you were the one that provided the skunk plants for the auction, and I think they got dropped off today or
mhm.
yesterday for the grow off competition. which is awesome. How did that come about? How did you, get a hold of those genes? What's the backstory? How, like, how do we get from there to here?
Well, I'm gonna try to be as to the point as possible and not try to give too much information out about whatnot. But so there was some 1996 seeds that Mel Frank had acquired from David Watson, Skunk Man Sam, and through a little circle that I was in, those were available in a limited stock, limited amount. Because we had talked about the Big Bud, that was one of the plants that I was like, oh shoot, it's around. I've already been working with the different landrace Afghans and NL5 and all these other ones already. I was like, well, you got skunk. I want some of what I want to do is some reproducing of classic strains with crosses. So that was some of the reason why I picked that up, because I wanted to get the most pure from the source seed stock, and that's part of like the whole land race hunting and all that stuff, is how close you can get to the home. You know, how
Hmm.
close you can get to home without going far away. I could pick the skunk. I could have got those seeds from any Dutch, Canadian, Spain seed vendor if I wanted to, but I wanted known that this is as close as it's going to get to the heritage history of this plant. Um,
When
and
was
so that's how was that.
when was this approximately?
Ooh, I would say I think the conversation started around at a conference around 2016, and then I think I got the stock around 2017, and Mel Frank actually hadn't seen any of this seed in flower since he reproduced them in 2010. And so that is that was kind of like the timeline, was like he saw it and he's like, okay, wow, okay. And he saw one of the selections, that's the heterozygous one. He saw that
Hmm.
one. Because that was the only one that I really wanted out of that little batch. And so that's how I
And
acquired it.
before we go
And
further, just I don't want to cut you off, but before we go any further, um, heterozygous meaning that you are seeing a very select traits. What was the selection that you looked at? What made you so caught up with that specific cultivar?
okay, so I was more caught up on the aspects of the strain, not so much the cannabinoids at that point. But when we were offered these DNA tests, not to claim the strain or whatnot, just to kind of see for fun, to see what the DNA of these plants were. So medicinal genomics had run the skunk lineage plants to see how closely tied they are to the other skunks in the um, canopedia, the tree, whatnot. And so the the THCA synthase was the one that linked one of the cuts to Skunk Man's from Weeblen. That test had the same THCS allele. So most alleles are homozygous, meaning that you get one copy, but in two, it's two of them. So in the one that I've been breeding with, I bred with both, but the other one I was breeding with was heterozygous, not homozygous. So it carried two, but two different alleles. One was found in the same Weeblen one that Sam Skunkman had, but it also had this other one that no one really knows what the function is. So that was that with it. That's what a heterozygous is. What I mean by heterozygous is that the THCS. So I'm not THC driven. I am actually driven due to what this other function is going to do, because of HPLC. I don't know if that one is going to trigger THCVA, if it's going to trigger CBG, if it's what it's going to trigger. So that's part of of the mystery of the heterozygous of it. And then I guess the next step is to take the parents and of the lineage, Acapulco gold if you can, if it's still there, Colombian gold if it's still there, and the Afghan, we can find the original one, which might be hard to run DNA to see which alleles they carry to say, oh wow, it was this parent and this parent that it makes it heterozygous. But normally a plant would have a homozygous, the same pair.
Yes. It's funny. I was over in Jamaica at a Charles Scott's farm, and he's known as a reefer man, but he's mostly well, as a breeder, he's known for the pink out of Canada, and he's known for Willie Nelson, and he's known for Dr. Grinspoon, which is really his, but it's I think it's called like Senor Garcia. But what he did was he went over to, because he worked in Mexico, worked in Colombia, and was over in Afghanistan. And what he did is he just did I'll connect the two of you, because then it would allow you to be able to start, kind of comparing samples genetically. Because what he did is he created something called skunk from scratch. And so he went to the regions where these parental plants had been chosen and chose own parental lines to create skunk from scratch from, just his direction. And it would be interesting to tie you two together so that you're able to take a look and compare and see, what's the relationship, because those regions, they were just legendary. You have, 400 or 500 years of cultivation in those spots of those things. And in Afghanistan, you have, like 5,000 years of cultivation. So
forever.
What I'll do is I'll tie you into them if you want. And that way you'd be able to, compare samples, because all you need is a stem. And then it would allow you to be able to genetically take a look and see, what's the similarities between your work and that work, just as a big picture view.
Yeah. And that was kind of the point, was, to see what these were about, because, it's not about that, but it's also about what you said right there. Is like, I got a lot of landrace seeds at availability through like Irazing and all those different crews. You're able to get a lot of those regions, and you're like, that'd be kind of fun to remake an L5 lineage, take my own version of it and make that lineage. Oh, that'd be kind of fun to make my own skunk lineage and then compare it to that skunk, kind of like what Reefer Man was doing. That would be kind of fun to make, the new haze by getting collecting all those land races and try to make a twist on a haze, So yeah, that's the point, is like of collecting these classic genes, is seeing like, what were these guys collecting, what were they doing, and what was their motive or their motivation to make it go this direction. And then you go, oh, I could see that in this plant. Okay, so let me try to take this other one that I found something different in, and mix these two females with that male, and then see that outcome. Sometimes you got to that's back to failure. Sometimes you just trash them. You're like, I don't know, look like a horse feed or something like that. and so then you're just like, all right, and then this one has potential, and then you move on with it and play with it. That's, in my opinion, that's an to me, it's like an art at that point. You're taking your passion that you acquired through the many years you've been smoking, and you're saying, I have this specific palette that I'm looking for, or there's a sandalwood linger, but how do I change that linger, my exhale linger, from the sandalwoody, hazy floral? How do I change that linger? Oh, this plant has this kind of like chocolate linger. Wow, it leaves this room smelling like a chocolate milkshake, when you pop the lid off of it, or, when you push the Hershey's chocolate syrup, in front of your nose, you take that whiff of the chocolate syrup, and it's like, wow, how did I get that? I want to blend that with this. That's the fun of it, and I think that's, I don't know. I just think that's something that like everyone should be doing, whether you're a recreational farm that has not, that can't afford to do that space. You should look into a little space and play with things and compare with your stock. Maybe you'll come up with something different. Don't just like always follow the clones kind of thing, is explore a little bit. That's how I feel the industry is really going to advance, is explore a little bit.
I agree. Have you used the particular skunk that you released into this project? Have you used it in any breeding work yet? Have you done any hybridization using it just, on your own to play with it? Or when you got to that point, were you happy with the plant as it is and you've just been using it as a production plant? Does it?
Oh, no, 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 no. I have not stopped with it. It's around. I had seed of it. That was the
Mhm.
point of it, was to remake seed, to make crosses. And within that, I'm still planting the seed I made from it, from that original stock, to see what other things I can get. But what I kept was more of a base of what I was hoping for, more of a future outcome. And I wasn't necessarily chasing the original skunk clone, because I don't know who those dudes, what they were going for, and they were lucky to get what they got. I'm going for the lineage, what the lineage could offer, and the potential of the lineage. And if you get a hint of the skunk, you're like, wow, it's in there. Okay, but what plant is causing it? Should I increase that genetic diversity of that? And so that was part of that, is more so exploring it than whatnot. But yeah, I still work with it.
Excellent. How was it that you got involved with the auction and then brought the plant forward?
Well, Lele, I've known Lele for a long time, and she just started talking to me about, we want to do this auction, and we want to get all these things, and we got medicinal genomics working with us, and we want to do this, and that, and I was like, hey, you know, there's all this chatter about skunk one online right now. Let's toss it in there, since it's a hot topic, and luckily we had free tests, donated to kind of show what they could do for the community. And and I we took full advantage of that to see what was going on. And that's pretty much, how my involvement with that was. And then you've been in meetings, we've been starting talking about what could we do with all this, how do we, you know move on. And then words of auctions, words of, competitions, all through our group meetings came up. And so it I don't think it was intended to be a centerpiece, but because we found relations, and because it was old school, it had has a history, it has a heritage. It it felt very fitting. But yeah, no, Lele asked me to join the group, and it was full of people like you, and Hendrix Farms, and many other people that are out there, in this community, Conscious Cultivators, who's a music producer, and all those things. And we put our heads together and started talking about this. I mean, and because people all around the world know skunk, um, why not? you know?
I agree. I just think it was such a good decision on your part and Lele's to go that route. And I think so much of it is that, for me at my age at 57, not that I don't like today's cannabis, because I do. There's an incredible cornucopia of quality available, but because the war on drugs and the way the system works, it ended up slowly chopping the old populations out to where very few people in the modern world of today have really had any exposure to any of these plants from the past. And for me, it's incredible to see them exposed to it, because for so much of it, it was cannabis that was selected for quality of effect versus the marketability in terms of like coloration, yield per square foot, COA numbers. And so even though those things are very important as diagnostic tools and production metrics so that you're able to, reach a certain financial goal, because cannabis at one time was, if you could grow good cannabis, it had value. the diversity within the gene pool in my early days of cannabis, in my early days in Humboldt in '90. It let me see a selection and a collection that I've never seen rivaled to this day. And that's why it's so interesting that, you went and dug up some old stock. You went after the stock that came from the source so that you'd be able to have as little interference genetically with what you were touching, as little like outcrossing. And then from there, you went and selected an outlier that really just kind of rung your bell. And then you were able to say, hey, this is so incredible. I work with it. What I want to do is I want to put it into the public domain so that what we have is exposure and the ability for people to go back in time and see this. And also, and it allows them to get exposed to you, because at the end of the day, your methodologies and process and direction and ethics all really line up beautifully as a craft cultivator, craft nutrient producer. And so I think that, when people get to touch it, yeah, no, it's real. When people get to touch it, it lets them see you in a different way as well, because the ability for you to say, hey, here's something that I found that was valuable. I have some incredible effects from consuming it. I love to work with it. It has interesting genetic capabilities, meaning that there's things of interest in here, traits of interest that we need to explore and go further. And now that plant is now in the public in a way that it hadn't been. And it allows there to be all these individuals to kind of get their feet wet on what we would call old heritage stock. I just love it, because anything that allows the world of cannabis to circulate and continue and allow people to understand that you can't have good herb today if you didn't have good herb yesterday. You can't take hay and turn it into gold. There had to have been gold in the past. And when we see the photos of plants, the comments are always like, look at the cannabis from the past. It doesn't look like the cannabis of today. But the problem is no one's consuming them side by side, so they don't quite understand that people were staring intuitively from the quality of impact. And what I saw was that individuals who chose the medical impact really had some of the greatest impact on the system. You and I were talking about Lawrence Ringo and how Lawrence wasn't using lab equipment to steer his original work because we didn't have testing at that time. That would have been 2008, 2009. And there really wasn't widespread testing available. And when he found that the plants that he had chosen for his back injury, make him feel better, had this disproportionate level of CBD compared to anything else in the market, it really started to launch the CBD revolution. So Lawrence, Wade Lauder, and William Courtney, due to their desires to have medical impact, really start to drive the world of breeding forward tremendously, because all of a sudden there was a desire to create something new, and you had to go hunt to find the plants that had the ability to create in their progeny a high CBD level. And so, your desires to work on medical cannabis to fit your needs and also be cultivatable in organic methodologies and in the region we're in, it let you steer some really interesting stuff. What are you working on right now other than the skunk? What's just like stuff you're interested in? What's catching your eye?
Ooh. Well, anyways, so now I've driven I had a focus on a lot of, doing all the replication work first, try to replicate classic strains and preserving. But my friend from that I grew up with in Davis, his family had owned a lot of land in Zambia, and throughout all his years of going there, visiting and living there, he had collected a lot of seed from the bushweed that he was getting down there. So he sent it to me, like, Zambia?
Yeah, in Africa. Where's Zambia located?
It's close to Zimbabwe and Malawi.
Bingo.
It borders Malawi, and so he was collecting a lot of bush seed from Zanzibar and different locations in the forests out there. And he sends me the seeds a few years ago, and my light lab had just got calibrated to test THCVA and THCV, which is a very, very, very rare, unique cannabinoid. So knowing that these were from Africa, like not touched from, breeders or whatnot yet, I planted a few, and they were old seeds, so I only got a few to sprout, and both of them were males. And I was like, something tells me I should keep one of these around, but I'm going to test them, even though I don't have the THCV. I'm just curious to see what they test like. But because my data can go to Orange Photonics, and they have a bigger machine that can analyze my data from, whatnot before the THCVA, they verified through theirs and through mine that my plants both had THCVA, and the one I let go on accident had 2 times more THCVA than THC than my 1.5 times. So I still have a lot, the 1.5, but I like the structure. I went back to judging by structure and durability and scent. It wasn't all analytic driven. And so I've been trying to work on breeding with it, but because it is of African lineage, a lot of it takes like 80 days, and sometimes the balls don't pop till about 50 days into flower, and you're like, shoot, all my other plants are about to be done. So you got to figure out the timing. So this year I'm gonna trigger a bunch of different ones in different sizes, different times of the year. I'm gonna throw some out late and have some out early, just to try to get of the males, to try to get them to at least have successful pollination. So I've been trying to collect varieties from different people who have wanted something special, change it up. If they have a special cultivar, let's say, we've talked about this many times, but the Blue Dream. Let's say someone wants Blue Dream THCV dominant strain. They're like, hey, let's link up. I got the cut. You got the mail. Let's try to make this happen. So that's what I've been trying to work on right now, is trying to like join the community and say, hey, let's try to go with these new cannabinoids. And back to the Ringo thing, is I have a cannabis plant that when I bought the light lab originally, when I was testing industrial hemp, I actually found from 1-to-1 stock a hemp compliant cultivar. So what I'm trying to do is introduce THCVA into this CBD dominant cannabis strain without it being hemp. And then because THCV and THCVA aren't on the schedule listing, and it can be sent with CBD, that's my project.
Well, that's you notice in some of the stuff you're working with, when it comes to some of the cannabinoids, do you notice that you are able to steer it through your nutrient program? Do you see some of that as influencers?
Mm-hmm. Especially when I was doing hemp. So like I was saying earlier in the conversation, if you give too much nitrogen, or you're blinded, or the weather, the weather blinds you about the availability in your soil. Sometimes giving too much nitrogen uh,
Oop, you break, brother.
influence inputs will break down at the wrong time. Get mixing that with location and hemp increase, or was that?
Oh, you were just breaking up a little bit, but I think we caught it. It was that when you're adding too much nitrogen, you end up having too much focus on biomass versus cannabinoid. And
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
do you
And a lot of that is the availability.
Do you like, say I was working on,
that was.
Do you design mixes as a nutrient provider? Do you make mixes for people that say, Marty, I want to work on some plants, and this is what I'm seeking to drive? Is that something that's steerable by you as a nutrient provider for a client?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you had a farm, or you, like you said, hey, you called me up, said, hey, Marty, we have this one plant that we want to do with, can you make it so that way we don't have to add your Go Green and your Blissful Bloom together? We don't really necessarily want to have this much alfalfa in there. That's from me making my own nutrients, I have that control. I can design them for you, and I can check the suspension qualities, make sure, I'll put it on my stir plate and stir it, make sure that the the timing is right. It stays in suspension as long as it can once it's agitated, so you don't have to run your pumps as long. Yeah, I do all that stuff. That's something that's part of my business, is to try to help customize those, and I can do it with soil too. I can help you build your soil if you're having a hard time, like with weather right now. This is a good example. This year's a great example because of the rain, and us not having that much sunshine. I think we're at 200 and like maybe 15 hours total up here of sunshine in the coast now, according to Monday's article, about 209.
Mhm.
So we don't have that much sunshine right now. So even my fruits and veggies right now aren't growing right. So I'm not trying to feed them the right certain stuff. But when I see them starting to fade, I can give them that quick little, food, and they jump right back, and then they're good. So that's part of being able to utilize a more instant mix. And if your specific plants need specifics, I need more potassium than what your blend can do, and I'd rather have it all in one. I can do that too.
That's awesome, man. I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time
Yeah.
to chat today, because like I said, I've always just respected your approach, because it's just such a organic, unique one. So few people on their own went so far into so many different directions and combined them, where there's breeding, there's nutrient development, and then there's lab analytics that you control yourself to steer and shape. So it gives you really like when I talk to you, is fascinating perspectives, because you might have run more lab analysis than many labs have, actually. I mean, now
Yeah,
it's
I have about 1,000 under my belt, well over 1,000 over my belt, from how many years I've done it, especially when I was doing the fertilizer analysis, because fertilizer analysis, that's a weekly thing. You're doing it on a weekly basis. You're not doing it just at the end of the cycle. You're starting from a live plant when it's in veg and going all the way through. So, that's that's a lot for one guy to handle. That's not an official lab.
Oh no, but you did a great job, because you got a great reputation. Any parting words for anyone that wants to get into cannabis? So for new viewers that watch, you gave a good tip early about be patient, and what else would you throw on top of that?
If you're passionate about the plant and you see the powers of cannabis, go for it. Don't give up just because. If it's something that you need in your life, and something that you feel is part of your life, that helps you meditate, that helps you do anything, why stop? That's my thing, is stop only when you need to stop.
Awesome. Thank you very much, and I think we'll end on that note.